I'm sure there's some nostalgia for older hardware there, but why is it that you want to be, interested? What's your interest in this actually coming from? Why do you have any interest in, Commodore 64? Because a lot of people would consider this hardware, obsolete at this point.
Well, sure. And so a couple of a few things with it. Like,
Hmm.
the Commodore 64 is before my time too, just
Sure,
to be
sure,
clear.
sure, sure.
Like, I know sometimes people ask me how old I am, and it's like I'm an age. Um I think it's good. But the Commodore 64 is actually older than me,
Mhm.
but I had systems of this vintage around as a kid. Either my friends had, like in the case of the Commodore 64, my friends had Commodore 64s lying around and we would
Right,
play the
right.
games. And so that's, in terms of figuring out how a system works,
Mm.
figuring out, like, if you think about the Commodore 64, when you open up or when you turn on the Commodore 64, you're greeted with a prompt that says ready, and there are commands there
Mm.
that you have to type in order to get anything done. And forgive me if this doesn't sound a little familiar
Mhm.
as somebody who does system administration. Like this it there's a similarity in scope, but the
Mhm.
difference, the Commodore 64 came out after Unix. It's
Mhm.
older than Unix.
Mhm.
And so it's not fair to say this directly inspired the Linux world, but there are certain things that I think mesh well together.
Mhm.
Like, yeah, I think about the idea that back in the day, the software was often copied and redistributed. And,
Right, it would be
say what
common for, a magazine to have code written in it that you would just type into the system, and that's how you would load a game into it.
in other words, the source was available.
Mhm.
And I think that that influenced some folks 10, 15, 20, 25 years later as they were developing our modern free and open source world,
Mhm.
that, like, hey, this kind of reminds me of that. And
Mhm.
I think
Mhm.
that that's a big chunk of the motivation. The other motivation for some of this, like especially the 8-bit era, is you have direct access to everything. It's like, if there's a user port on this thing, and if I want to run a command to send voltage through one of the pins, I can do that.
Mhm.
That's kinda challenging on a modern computer. Like, it's not impossible, there's systems for that, and there's external boards to connect to a breadboard or whatever,
Right,
but, like,
yeah, but
on
you're
this.
not really doing it with, like, a full-on, AMD system with, like, some crazy Intel chip. If you're doing that with modern hardware, you're talking about, like, small embedded systems for the most part.
Yeah, you're
Or, like,
getting super.
really complex kernel code.
Exactly. No, and this thing, you're just, like, right there. You're sitting on top of it, and that has some excitement to me,
Mm.
and I think it has some excitement to a lot of other people in the Linux community. And I think there tends to be some shared vibe between the two, and I think that has a good amount of it. Like, I think that explains it a bit.
Mhm. So, what's some of the fun stuff that you can actually do with a Commodore 64 nowadays? 'Cause I'm sure there's tons of mods that are available for them at this point.
Oh,
People
absolutely.
fully understand how this system works and do a lot of really cool things with them. So, what's some of the stuff that can be done with them?
Well, I just did a video, not to plug my video,
Go
but
right ahead.
I'm a plug my video. I just made a video about an HDMI mod
Mm.
for the Commodore 64 that replaces the aged, out of date RF modulator that,
Uh, RF
you would
modulator.
basically. Yeah, so the RF modulator, a lot of older systems, the Nintendo had this, the Super Nintendo had this. If you think about a television in the 80s, had, in many cases, the only input would be the antenna.
Mm, mm.
And so what you would do is you would use a RF modulator to basically create a small little broadcast studio inside your Commodore 64 or your
Right.
Nintendo or your Super Nintendo. And it would send out the signal into basically your antenna port on the TV,
Mhm.
and you could use that to get your video and audio. Well, nowadays with the proliferation of wireless devices and, the
Mhm.
changing of the wireless spectrum, that port is for a lot of people, it's basically useless. Like, when
Yeah.
I plug this in, it's garbage. I can't get anything off of that port.
Right, there's too
And there
much,
are other
like, wireless noise in the area, it gets disrupted.
exactly.
Mhm, mhm,
And so it ends up interfering with the stuff,
mhm,
and so what we do is what this mod does is you remove the RF modulator and you replace it with an HDMI port,
mhm,
and the board actually has an FPGA on it that replicates the video chip. And so it
mhm,
gets the same signal off of the video chip, like literally the same voltages, the same information.
mhm,
And it just replicates what the video chip would be sending out to composite video, the older style,
mhm.
but over an HDMI port. And then you can just plug it into a modern screen and just use your Commodore 64 like you would any other console today. It makes it
Mhm,
as
mhm.
easy to use one of these as something like a PlayStation 5,
Right.
and that it's actually easier because this doesn't require an internet connection.